In the annals of history, there exists a relationship so profound that it shaped the destiny of the known world. A bond between master and student that transcended mere instruction and became the blueprint for conquest, wisdom, and immortal legacy. But what if I told you that the greatest military mind the world has ever known wasn't born on the battlefield, but in a classroom? That the man who conquered the Persian Empire, who wept when there were no more worlds to conquer, was first conquered by ideas. Aristotle understood something that most educators fail to grasp even today. Knowledge without application is merely entertainment, and power without philosophy is tyranny waiting to collapse. When King Philip II of Macedon summoned Aristotle to tutor his 13-year-old son Alexander, he wasn't just hiring a teacher. He was commissioning the architect of an empire that would stretch from Greece to India, encompassing over 2 million square miles of territory. But here's the paradox we all face. We live in an age of infinite information, yet finite wisdom. We consume content, but remain unchanged. We learn tactics, but lack strategy. We seek power, but don't understand its true nature. Alexander didn't just learn philosophy from Aristotle. He learned how to think, how to see patterns in chaos, how to transform knowledge into dominion over reality itself. Today, we're not simply recounting history. We're extracting the 3 most transformative teachings that Aristotle gave to Alexander, principles so powerful that they turned a teenage prince into a legend who would be called the Great for the next 2,000 years. These aren't abstract philosophical concepts. They're practical frameworks for mastering your own mind, influencing others, and building something that outlasts your mortality. By the end of this journey, you'll possess the same mental tools that conquered the ancient world. The question is, what empire will you build with them? The golden mean, the art of strategic balance. Aristotle's doctrine of the golden mean states that virtue exists between 2 extremes, the middle path between deficiency and excess. But this isn't about mediocrity or compromise. It's about calibrated dominance. Too much aggression makes you predictable and reckless. Too much caution makes you irrelevant and forgotten. The golden mean is the razor's edge where maximum effectiveness lives. Why does this work? Because human psychology operates on patterns of expectation. When you're always aggressive, people build defenses against you. When you're consistently passive, they ignore you entirely. The golden mean creates cognitive dissonance in your opponents. They cannot predict your next move because you aren't locked into a single mode of being. Aristotle taught Alexander that true power lies not in rigid consistency, but in adaptive calibration. Think of it as the difference between a battering ram and a scalpel. One breaks through by brute force, announcing its presence. The other cuts precisely where needed, adjusting depth and angle based on resistance. Alexander learned to be both, knowing exactly which moment called for which approach. Consider the Gordian knot, a legendary puzzle that had stumped rulers and warriors for generations. According to prophecy, whoever could untie this impossibly complex knot would rule all of Asia. When Alexander arrived at Gordium in 333 BCE, crowds gathered to watch him attempt what so many had failed to accomplish. Traditional thinking would suggest 2 approaches: spend hours meticulously working on the knot like his predecessors, or walk away to preserve dignity. Alexander did neither. He studied the knot for a moment, recognized that the challenge was designed to trap people in conventional thinking, drew his sword, and sliced through it with a single stroke. The crowd stood in stunned silence. Some called it cheating, others called it sacrilege. But Aristotle had taught Alexander something crucial. The rules of engagement are often the real trap. The golden mean isn't about choosing between extremes. It's about recognizing when the entire framework is false. Alexander found the middle path between slavish adherence to tradition and complete disregard for the challenge. He honored the prophecy by solving it, just not in the expected way. Within months, he had defeated Darius III at the Battle of Issus and begun his conquest of Persia. The Gordian knot wasn't just a party trick. It was a demonstration of philosophical principle transformed into psychological warfare. In today's world, the Gordian knot appears everywhere. You're told to choose between work and life balance, between being authentic and being strategic, between collaboration and competition. But these are false dichotomies designed to limit your thinking. The most successful people don't choose, they reframe. Look at how Elon Musk approaches business. When everyone said you had to choose between environmental responsibility and performance in cars, Tesla proved the dichotomy false. When people said space exploration required government budgets, SpaceX demonstrated otherwise. This is the golden mean in action. Not compromise, but transcendence of the artificial limits others accept. First, identify the false choices in your life. When someone presents you with either or, ask yourself, who benefits from limiting my options to these two? The golden mean begins by refusing to accept artificial constraints. Second, develop situational fluidity. Practice moving between different modes of operation. Be aggressive in negotiations one day, collaborative the next. Be visible in certain contexts, invisible in others. The power lies not in consistency, but in strategic unpredictability calibrated to your objectives. We've uncovered the first pillar of Alexander's education, the golden mean, the principle that transformed a young prince into a tactical genius who could see beyond false choices and reframe reality itself. You now understand that true power doesn't come from choosing between extremes, but from mastering the ability to navigate between them with precision and purpose. But here's what most people miss. Balance without vision is just sophisticated drift. Alexander didn't just learn how to think flexibly, he learned what to think about, where to direct that formidable mental machinery. And that's where the story deepens. Before we continue, if you're finding value in this journey, follow the White Rabbit. Subscribe and leave a comment sharing which of these teachings resonates most with your own battles. The algorithm favors engagement, and your participation helps these ideas reach others who are searching for the same transformation you're undergoing now. The next teaching is darker, more profound, and infinitely more dangerous. It's about the nature of reality itself, not what is, but what could be. Aristotle taught Alexander to see potential where others saw only present circumstances. He taught him to look at a fragmented Greek world and envision a unified empire. To look at the unconquerable Persian army and see its weakness. To look at himself and see not a mortal, but a force of nature. This isn't just philosophy. This is the cognitive technology that separates visionaries from dreamers, conquerors from contestants. The next teaching reveals how to bend reality through the power of potentiality. Potentiality and actuality, the architecture of transformation. Aristotle's metaphysics distinguishes between potentiality, what something could become, and actuality, what something currently is. But he taught Alexander something revolutionary. The ability to see potentiality while others only see actuality is the fundamental advantage in any domain. Warfare, politics, relationships, self-mastery. Reality isn't fixed. It's a negotiation between what is and what could be. And the victor is whoever can envision and actualize the superior possibility first. This works because most humans are trapped in the tyranny of the present. They see obstacles as permanent, situations as fixed, people as unchangeable. This is a cognitive blindness that Aristotle identified and Alexander weaponized. When you can perceive potential, you're operating in a different dimension than your competition. You're not reacting to what is, you're creating what will be. Consider a marble block. Most people see only stone. Michelangelo saw David. The marble didn't change. The perception of its potential changed everything. Aristotle taught Alexander to look at every situation, every person, every army, every terrain, not for what it was, but for what it could become under the right application of force and intelligence. This is why Alexander was never deterred by inferior numbers, hostile terrain, or seemingly impossible odds. He wasn't seeing the same reality everyone else was seeing. He was seeing the potential configuration, the possible transformation, the latent victory hidden within apparent defeat. Let me take you to 326 BCE, to the banks of the Hydaspes River in what is now Pakistan. Alexander faces King Porus and his army, which includes something Alexander's forces have never encountered in significant numbers: war elephants. 200 of them. These weren't just animals, They were living tanks, capable of crushing infantry formations and creating mass panic. Alexander's generals saw actuality. We are outnumbered, fighting in unfamiliar territory against an enemy with a devastating tactical advantage. Several advised retreat. This would have been the rational response to the actual situation. But Alexander saw potentiality. He observed that elephants, despite their size, were animals with predictable behavioral patterns. They could be startled, they could be confused. They required experienced handlers to remain effective. And most crucially, their greatest strength, their intimidating mass, could become their greatest weakness in the right circumstances. He divided his forces in an unconventional pattern, creating multiple crossing points to split Porus's attention. When the battle began, instead of engaging the elephants head-on, Alexander's troops targeted their handlers with javelins, then created chaos with coordinated noise and fire. The elephants, panicked and wounded, turned on their own forces, trampling infantry and creating the very disorder they were meant to prevent. The actual situation said, elephants are invincible. The potential situation said, elephants are a vulnerability disguised as strength. Alexander won because he operated in the dimension of potential, while his enemy remained trapped in the dimension of the actual. This principle is the secret behind every major disruption in modern business and culture. Netflix saw the potential in streaming when Blockbuster only saw the actuality of physical rentals. Airbnb saw the potential in unused living spaces when hotels only saw the actuality of their market dominance. Every revolutionary innovation comes from someone who perceived potentiality, while incumbents remained fixated on actuality. But this applies far beyond business. When you look at yourself, do you see only your current limitations, your actual state, or do you see your potential? Most people construct their entire identity around actuality. I'm not good at math. I'm an introvert. I've always been this way. These are cages built from refusing to see potential. The person who bullied you sees their actual power over you. But if you see the potential for your transformation, for developing skills they lack, for building influence they cannot imagine, you're already operating in a different reality. They're fighting yesterday's battle while you're preparing for tomorrow's. First, practice the potential audit. Look at every situation you currently label as negative or limiting. Force yourself to articulate 3 potential transformations of that situation. This isn't positive thinking. It's training your perception to see beyond the actual. That difficult boss? Potential to develop political skills, to learn what not to do as a leader, to build resilience. That financial constraint? Potential to develop creativity, resourcefulness, strategic thinking. Reframe actuality as raw material for potential. Second, reverse engineer transformation. Identify someone who has achieved what you want. Study not their current state, actuality, but their transformation path, how they moved from potential to actual. The gap between their starting point and current state is a map of potentiality realized. This map is more valuable than any advice about maintaining success because it shows you how transformation actually occurs. The contemplative life and the active life, the unity of wisdom and power. Aristotle's greatest teaching to Alexander was perhaps his most paradoxical. The contemplative life, philosophical reflection, and the active life, engagement with the world, are not opposites but complementary forces that must be integrated. Knowledge without action is sterile speculation. Action without knowledge is reckless chaos. The truly powerful individual doesn't choose between thinking and doing. They create a feedback loop where each amplifies the other. This works because reality operates on multiple levels simultaneously. The physical level, where actions occur, is governed by laws that exist on the intellectual level. Most people operate purely at one level. Intellectuals think without doing, practitioners do without thinking. Both remain incomplete and ultimately ineffective at the highest levels of achievement. Aristotle taught Alexander that every military campaign should be both a philosophical exercise and a practical conquest. Every battle was an opportunity to test theory against reality, to refine understanding through application. This is why Alexander carried the Iliad with him throughout his conquests, sleeping with it under his pillow. But contemplation, followed by action, followed by reflection, creates an exponential learning curve that separates masters from practitioners. In 331 BCE, before the decisive battle of Gaugamela against Darius III, Alexander did something that bewildered his generals. With the Persian army visible on the horizon, nearly 250,000 troops against his 47,000, Alexander ordered his army to rest, not just to sleep, but he himself withdrew into his tent and spent hours in what his companions described as deep contemplation. His second-in-command, Parmenion, was furious. The enemy was right there. Surprise attack at night could work in their favor. Every military instinct said to act now. But Alexander refused. He was integrating the contemplative and the active. What was he doing in that tent? He was running simulations in his mind, visualizing terrain, troop movements, potential responses to every scenario. He was applying everything Aristotle had taught him about logic, about anticipating consequences, about understanding causation. He wasn't just planning tactics. He was contemplating the entire system of the battle, seeing patterns that only emerge through rigorous thought. The next day, Alexander executed one of the most brilliant tactical maneuvers in military history. He deliberately created a gap in his own line, something that should have been suicidal. Knowing that Darius, following conventional military wisdom, would commit his forces to exploit the weakness. When Darius did exactly this, Alexander had already positioned cavalry to collapse on the exposed Persian flanks. The gap wasn't a mistake. It was bait, designed through the integration of contemplative understanding and active application. Darius's army, despite overwhelming numerical advantage, collapsed. The Persian king fled, and Alexander's integration of philosophy and warfare produced a victory that military strategists still study 3,000 years later. We live in an era that worships action. Just do it. Fail fast. Ship now. But this is incomplete wisdom, the philosophy of perpetual beginners. The truly exceptional integrate contemplation into their action cycles. Jeff Bezos famously makes high-quality decisions by insisting on written memos and silent reading time before meetings. He's forcing contemplative space into the active business environment. Warren Buffett spends 80% of his time reading and thinking, 20% acting. This seems backwards until you realize the quality of that 20% is exponentially higher because it's informed by the 80%. The contemplative life isn't separate from success. It's the force multiplier that transforms ordinary action into extraordinary results. But here's where most people fail. They contaminate contemplation with anxiety and action with thoughtlessness. True contemplation isn't worry, it's structured analysis. True action isn't busyness, it's decisive execution. The integration requires discipline on both sides. First, create sacred contemplative space. Before any major decision or action, schedule uninterrupted time for structured thinking, not daydreaming, not worrying, actual systematic analysis. Ask, what am I trying to achieve? What are the second and third order consequences? What patterns from past experience apply? What am I not seeing? This contemplative practice transforms random action into strategic movement. Second, build feedback loops. After significant actions, schedule reflection time. What worked? What failed? Why? What does this teach me about the system I'm operating in? Most people just move to the next action, never extracting the wisdom from experience. This is why they keep making the same mistakes. The integration of contemplation and action requires closing the loop, using action to inform contemplation, using contemplation to refine action. The integration. We've journeyed through the three teachings that transformed a Macedonian prince into Alexander the Great. The Golden Mean, which taught strategic balance beyond false choices. Potentiality and Actuality, which revealed how to see and create what others cannot. And the unity of contemplation and action, which integrated wisdom and power into a single force. But here's the truth that Aristotle understood and Alexander embodied. These aren't separate teachings. They're facets of a single diamond, the philosophy of conscious mastery over reality. The Golden Mean allows you to move fluidly between states, Potentiality allows you to perceive what those states could become. And the integration of contemplation and action allows you to actually make the transformation real. Alexander didn't conquer the world through superior numbers or resources. He conquered it through superior consciousness, the ability to see more, think deeper, and act more decisively than anyone else in his field of vision. And that same capacity exists dormant in you, waiting to be activated by the same principles. The challenge. The question isn't whether these teachings work. History has already proven that, beyond any doubt. The question is whether you'll apply them, or simply consume them as interesting information. Will you identify the false choices limiting your vision? Will you train yourself to see potentiality where others see only obstacles? Will you integrate contemplation and action into a unified practice? Most people will watch this video, feel inspired for 17 minutes, and return to exactly the same patterns they've always followed. They'll remain in the actual, while the potential stays forever out of reach. But you're not most people, or you wouldn't have stayed with me this long. Final philosophical reflection. Aristotle once wrote, "We are what we repeatedly do." Excellence, then, is not an act, but a habit. He taught Alexander that greatness isn't a destination or a single victory. It's a way of being, constructed through the daily application of these principles until they become as natural as breathing. Alexander wept when he believed there were no more worlds to conquer. But the truth is, there are infinite worlds. They just exist in different dimensions. The world of your potential, the world of your transformed relationships, the world of your realized vision. These are territories as vast as any empire, waiting for someone with the consciousness to see them and the courage to conquer them. If this journey resonated with something deep within you, if you sense that these aren't just historical curiosities but active tools for transformation, then follow the White Rabbit. Subscribe to this channel because we're just getting started. Share this video with someone who's ready to stop living in the actual and start creating the potential. And comment below. Which of these 3 teachings will you implement first? The path from who you are to who you could become isn't marked on any map, but the principles we've explored today are the compass. Aristotle gave Alexander the tools to conquer the known world. Now you have the same tools. The only question remaining is, what empire will you build?